National Art Gallery.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our distinguished speaker, Professor Tommy Koh, Ambassador at Large, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Professor Koh, Ambassador at Large, Mr. Ong Yu Huat, Chairman of the National Heritage Board, Mrs. Rosa Daniel, Chief Executive Officer of the National Heritage Board, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to the NHB Academy's lecture on art, culture and heritage in Singapore, towards a common vision and agenda. We are privileged to have Professor Tommy Koh with us today, and he'll be sharing on how the government, community groups and the general public can be united in our aim to make Singapore a Renaissance city. Before we start the lecture, I would like to invite Chairman of the National Heritage Board, Mr. Ong Yu Huat, to say a few words. Mr. Ong, please.
Professor Tommy Koh, Ambassador at Large, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. On behalf of the National Heritage Board, I'm really very happy to welcome all of you here today for this program under the NHB Academy. Now, I know you came to listen to Professor Koh speak, but I hope you'll allow me just a little bit of time to tell you a little bit about the NHB Academy, and also maybe to introduce our speaker properly. Since its establishment in June 2010, the Academy has undertaken capability development, outreach to develop our museums and our heritage professionals. Our objective is to be a strong training institution in heritage and museum management, and over time to position Singapore as a regional hub for professional heritage management and museum training. With that in mind, we also facilitate research and exchange of best practices amongst our professionals in this heritage ecosystem, both locally and in the region. In the past, 3 years, the Academy has implemented training and development programs to address the needs of the local museum sector. This includes co-developing training curriculum and workshops for museum professionals with internationally acclaimed institutions like the Smithsonian, or collaborating with Tourism Management Institute of Singapore for the training of our guides. The Academy has also organized several talks like the one we have today, featuring outstanding academics and speakers under the Distinguished Speaker Series. Over the next few years, the Academy will continue to partner with local and international institutions to offer customized museum training and to present programs by thought leaders in the field of museum and heritage. In time, the Academy hopes and aims to contribute to a vibrant heritage sector with high-quality homegrown exhibitions, programs, and tours offered not only by the NHB, but in particular by our partners in the network of museums and heritage institutions in Singapore. Today's lecture is one of several platforms to enhance knowledge of professionals in Singapore's local heritage sector and to equip them with international best practices, understanding, and core skills in the areas of curation, exhibition management, collection management, and conservation. It is very appropriate that this year, as the NHB celebrates its 20th anniversary, that we have Professor Tommy Koh to address us under the NHB Academy. Now, Tommy Koh needs no introduction to all of us here, having served in many leadership roles in government and in organizations. But of course, we are most proud of him for being the chairman of the National Heritage Board from 2002 to 2000, 2011. When I asked him what he was up to, he very modestly replied that he was just the same old busybody as usual. But of course, we know that his portfolio includes being ambassador at large for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, special advisor for the Institute of Policy Studies, and chairman of the Center of International Law at the NUS, to name a few. As Singapore's ambassador at large, he has made his mark in international diplomacy, law, and arts. As chairman of the National Heritage Board, he played a very significant role in NHB's high-growth years in the development and promotion of Singapore's heritage, history, and arts through our museums and outreach initiatives. During his term as chairman, Singapore's heritage and culture were made more accessible to public through various initiatives, through an opening and the development of the museums, initiatives also such as the Singapore Heritage Fest, heritage trails, cultural performances, and community activities, just to name some of them. I must also highlight that the NHB Academy was Professor Koh's brainchild, and for that we owe him a big thank you for providing us with this wonderful platform to reach out to our stakeholders and partners. Now, Professor Koh is also a very keen supporter of Singapore artists. He made it a point to promote and showcase the work of Singapore artists, both pioneers and the young ones, in our museums. As the founding chairman of the National Arts Council, he launched many initiatives that benefited arts development in Singapore, including greater public appreciation of the arts, pushing for state support of the arts, and initiating grants and scholarships that young artists could use in their training, both locally and overseas. In typical Tommy Koh style, he also had this regular contact program where he met local artists on a very regular basis over coffee or over meals. And here I must not lose this opportunity to tell you the story of when I was invited to one of these sessions, just as one of the guests. It was at the Four Seasons Hotel. It was a dinner. And the special guest, the artist, happened to be Kumar, our cross-dressing entertainer stroke pavilion, comedian. So Kumar comes to the dinner, he rushes through his food, and we said, "Why are you rushing?" And he said, "I have a show to do." And at that point, he said, "How about all of you come to my show?" And our host, Professor Koh, said, "Sure." So we finished this sumptuous dinner at the Four Seasons. It was speeded up to triple the speed, finished the meal, and then all of us trooped out of the Four Seasons, and we walked in a line, led by Kumar, Professor Koh, and the rest of us, a little hesitantly, across Orchard Road into Orchard Towers. Now, for those of you, I'm sure, who have had experience at Orchard Towers, it was a sight to see. Us rather prim and proper people walking in. I, of course, having had Professor Koh as my shield and my excuse in case someone saw and misinterpreted my intentions. So we end up going to the club, Kumar's club, and it's full house. But he waves his hand, and the assistants come out, and they push all the tables aside. They literally push all the tables aside, and they open up a new foldable table. They put it in the middle. They put chairs there. And so all of us were seated right up against the stage, and the show began. That's something that I will not forget. Therefore, I'm sure you will agree with me that Professor Tommy Koh is the absolute right person to talk to us today on the topic of art, heritage, culture towards a common vision and agenda. I hope that you will enjoy the lecture, and without further ado, can I invite Professor Koh, please.
That was quite an introduction. I will not give a Kumar-like speech this afternoon. And incidentally, that particular evening and dinner wasn't part of my NAC portfolio. But when I was director of IPS, I had about 100 corporate members, and I had to ensure that they get value so they'll remain as our corporate members, because they give us an annual subscription of $10,000 each. So together they give us $1 million, and I wanted to reduce the government funding for the think tank and increase private funding so that we would not be viewed by the public as being completely beholden to the government. And I have to keep these corporate chiefs entertained, amused, satisfied. So we put on special briefings for them. But in addition, I held a monthly dinner for about 12 of them each month. And I would ask them, who would you like to meet? You know, you've been in Singapore. And they said, oh, we want to meet Lan Shui. So I invited Maestro Shui to join us. We want to meet Maestro Ye Chong. So we invited. And then one feedback I got, we want to meet Kumar. And I said, luckily I knew Kumar, so I asked Kumar, will you feel comfortable coming to dinner with us at Four Seasons? And he said, yeah, completely comfortable. He's actually a very well-informed individual, you know, intelligent, well-informed. I should have turned him down when he said we'd like to see his nightclub show, because it was really too vulgar for it was really quite outrageous. So I must apologize to you for having inflicted that evening. I ran away at midnight when nobody was looking. But let me begin all over again and do a very long salutation. I see so many good friends, partners who've helped in the work of both NAC and NHB. So let me begin by greeting some of my childhood friends, Lena and Willie Lim. Betty, I wouldn't call you a childhood friend, but but friend of long-standing. Betty, friend of long-standing. But I want to also greet and salute good friends. The former chairman of the National Museum, G.K. Goh, the former chairman of the Philatelic Museum, Daniel Teo, the founding chairman of the Asian Civilization Museum, James Koo. Who else are here? I don't see Xiao Chuan. Or, the founding director of both the ACM and Peranakan Museum, Kenson Kwok, is somewhere around. Kenson is here. I don't know whether Ken Chow is here, the director of Singapore Art Museum. Then I recognize somebody in the back who was part of the pioneering team at the National Arts Council, Kok Hua. Thank you for attending. And of course, Singapore's most distinguished diplomat, Professor Chan Heng Ji. Ladies and gentlemen, I must disappoint you if you expect interesting a performance as Kumar. And the title of my talk, I think, was too ambitious. What I want to do is to reminisce with you the experience I've had in working in various jobs in the art, culture, and heritage sector, some reflections, and then to share with you my personal vision for the future and 3 thoughts on what I would focus on. I want to begin by thanking my good friend, Mr. Ong Yu Huat, for introducing me. And I thank Rosa Daniel for seducing me at lunch. She hosted me to lunch at Flukes. And she said the payback for the sumptuous lunch is I have to do a lecture for her. So I said, okay. My life has been greatly enriched by the many opportunities which the Singapore government has given me to work in this domain art, culture, and heritage. And I would like to use this opportunity, although none of them is here, to say how grateful I am to the various ministers at MITA and MICA, namely George Yeo, Lee Yock Swan, David Lim, Lee Boon Yang, and Lui Tak Yew, for the confidence they had reposed in me. In 1991, soon after I returned from Washington, D.C., George Yeo asked me whether I could be the founding chairman of the National Arts Council. And Heng Chi knows the story. I already had 2 other jobs, so I just forgot something. I forgot to greet Professor Tan Tai Yong, who has been the chairman of the National Museum and has also been a really close friend and ally, both in this and other good work. I was saying that George Yeo had asked me to be the founding chairman of NAC. I was at first reluctant because I had 2 other jobs, but he said, quoting somebody I forgot, that to get a job done, you should give it to a busy person. So you know, George Yeo is not somebody you can easily say no to. So I accepted. I must say, looking back, I had 5 very happy years. Very, very happy years. As a result of my monthly tea parties, I got to know many of our artists. I came to know them very well, and they shared with me their struggles and their successes. And some of them have become close friends. I would just share with them, the new chairman of NAC, that life was simpler in the early 90s. There were not so many performances and exhibitions, and I made every effort to attend every one of the exhibition and performance, because it means a lot to the artists, not just to have your financial support, but to have your moral support. I'm very pleased that my good friend Professor Chan Heng Chi is the new chairman, and another good friend, Cathy Lai, I don't think she's here, is the new CEO, or Cathy is here. Another old friend, Cathy, is the new CEO of the National Arts Council. With this team of able leaders, I'm sure that NAC will have a very bright future. I cannot use the word happy to describe the challenging experience I had of chairing the Censorship Review Committee in 1991 and 1992. This requires another story. The issue of having a censorship review committee was raised in Parliament, and Prime Minister Goh turned to Minister Yeo and said, who will you appoint to chair the committee? And without first consulting me, George Yeo said, I would nominate Tommy. So the Prime Minister mentioned my name in Parliament. When my wife heard it on the news, she was horrified. She quite correctly predicted that nobody would be pleased with my work, because the older Singaporeans would accuse me of becoming a corrupting influence, and the younger Singaporeans would feel that I've not gone far enough in liberalizing, which was true. Because George Yeo had not consulted me in advance, he was very generous and said, you could choose the members of your committee. And I was very ambitious. I chose 19 colleagues to represent basically Singapore. I wanted a committee that was a microcosm of Singapore. People from all the 4 language streams, every ethnic, religious group, people who are atheists on the one hand, like Catherine Lim, and 2 Christian pastors, which was a mistake, by the way. and people who are young, people who are old, people from the performing arts, and people who are non-consumers of arts. So it was a very fractious committee, and it took us actually 12 months of regular brainstorming meeting before we arrived at a consensus. But when we arrived at a consensus, I was confident that if the 19 of us could agree on these recommendations, there was a very good likelihood that the government would accept our recommendation, which was the case. So I would say that the 2 years chairing the censorship review committee were not exactly happy years, but they were satisfying years because it gave my colleagues and me an opportunity to persuade the Goh Chok Tong government to gradually liberalize our censorship policies and rules, and just as importantly, to devolve the power of decision making from the bureaucracy to the people. It also taught me a very important lesson, and you will remember that I've been away 20 years, so I was kind of unfamiliar with Singapore. It also taught me a very important lesson that in Singapore, we have to manage very sensitively the tension between artistic freedom on the one hand and the imperative of maintaining racial and religious harmony on the other hand. And of maintaining the tension also between older Singaporeans like my wife, who want to keep Singapore a morally wholesome society, and younger Singaporeans like my children, who want to embrace the contemporary world in all its diversities and colors. So we have to constantly manage these tensions, which can never be resolved, you know. But I must confess to you that because I was a member of this committee of 19 and we worked by consensus, one of the questions that Singapore government posed to us was whether or not to ban Salman Rushdie's book, Satanic Verses. And you know, I'm a liberal by instinct, and the last thing I want to do is to ban any book. But the Malay and Muslim colleagues in the committee felt so strongly against the book that in the interest of consensus, the committee advised the government to ban the book. I didn't dare to tell my Malay and Muslim colleagues that I actually have a copy of the book and had read it in America, and I did not think one should have banned the book. But America is different from Singapore, so that one of the lessons I learned, and that what is tolerated in America may not be tolerated here. We were also asked whether to ban Martin Scorsese's film, The Last Temptation of Christ. And here we recommended not banning the film. Not because the churches didn't appeal to ban it. The churches appealed to us to ban the film. They found it profoundly offensive. But because we felt that although the Christians would be aggrieved, they would take our decision not to ban the film with a certain degree of equanimity. Yeah. So we took advantage of our Christian brothers and sisters. Just want to share with you that experience. Soon after I completed my work on the Censorship Review Committee, and this is 93, I had another phone call from George Yeo and said, I have another assignment for you. And this really came unexpectedly. James and Kenson would know this, that the building that houses the Asian Civilization Museum in Empress Place has had several previous incarnations. And in one of those incarnations, it was the home of what was then called the Empress Place Museum. The Empress Place Museum was established by the Singapore Tourism Board as a result of an agreement between Singapore and China, whereunder Singapore agreed to help promote tourism to China. This was in the early 90s, when China had very few inbound tourists. And the mission was to use the Empress Place Museum to showcase the cultural splendors of 4 Chinese dynasties as well as the Bronze Age. And so over a period of years, the Empress Place Museum mounted what I thought were quite splendid exhibitions on the cultural achievements of the Han Dynasty, the Tang Dynasty, the Ming Dynasty, and the Qing Dynasty, as well as the Bronze Age. Well, in 1993, the then chairman of the museum and a very dear friend got into trouble with the law and was removed. And Joshua appointed me to replace him and to clean up the mess. I have a colleague from the National Archives here, Leong Wing Ki. I don't know where. Are you here, Wing Ki? No. Leong Wing Ki was the general manager of the Empress Place Museum, and he helped me to sort out all the financial matters and to clean up the management of the museum. The big lesson I learned from that episode is the importance of good governance in everything we do, whether it's running a museum or commercial enterprise or even an academic institution. And so when I became chairman at NHB, I made sure that both on the main board and the sub-boards, we have good lawyers and good accountants like Yu Huat and Gautam Banerjee to make sure that our governance was impeccable. But I also want to tell you a story, which is that when the final exhibition of the Empress Place Museum, the Qing Dynasty, I think, was over, I brought a copy of the catalogue, and I written the foreword to that catalogue in which I paid a tribute to my predecessor. And I then went to visit him in Changi Prison and gave him a copy of the catalogue. I just want to say to him that, okay, you've done something wrong, you're paying for it, but Singapore must never forget all the contributions that you have made, not just to the Empress Place Museum, but in so many others of his jobs. But unfortunately, Singapore is not a very forgiving society, you know. So once you're in trouble, it's very hard to have a second life, I think. Let me just go on to talk about a very interesting and happy experience. When I was chairman of the National Arts Council, the government decided that it would implement one of the recommendations in the Ong Teng Chong report. The Ong Teng Chong report had, among other things, recommended the building of a Center for Performing Arts. And the Goh Chok Tong government wanted to bring this to reality. So a steering committee was established for this purpose with a very powerful composition. Ong Teng Chong was a member of the committee together with George Shou and Wong Kang Seng. I was a member because I was chairman of NAC. And it was also decided that under the umbrella of NAC, we would incorporate the company to drive the implementation of the project. So for many years, I was intimately involved in the visioning, planning, the design, and the building of the Esplanade. Xiao Chuan is not here, but he played a very important role in this exercise. And after this Esplanade had been built and was in operation, I also served on his board for 7 years. So I have a very warm spot in my heart for the Esplanade. My reflection is that the decision to build the Esplanade was one of the best investments we have ever made, because it has really transformed the cultural life of Singapore. We cannot imagine Singapore without the Esplanade. And when I think back to the critical day on which we were going to announce the decision to build the Esplanade, there were people in very high position who had cold feet, you know. They were not sure. They called me up and said, would we be beaten up by the public for spending $600 million? And I said, no, they are not taxpayers' money, they're gamblers' money, you know. And I think Singaporeans will feel that the time has come to have a world-class center for performing arts. They said, can we fill 2 such big theaters, 1,000-seat symphony hall and 2,000-seat theater? And I said, well, if you don't try, you never know, but I think we're ready. There was a last-minute compromise. And MCCY's predecessor, Meter, asked me to be the bad guy and announced at a press conference that the Esplanade would be built in 2 phases, and that the 2 big venues, the concert hall and theatre, would be built in phase 1, and the 2 smaller venues, a 400-seat and an 800-seat theatre, would be built in phase 2. Although I was only the messenger, the Singapore arts community accused me of having betrayed them, because they were more interested in the 2 smaller venues than in the 2 bigger venues. And I suspect they also were not sure whether there would ever be a phase 2, you know. So since Rosa Daniel, as both CEO of NHB and also Deputy Secretary of NCCY, I want to make a passionate appeal to her that I hope NCCY will, in the coming years, announce that phase 2 will be completed. This will help to repair my credibility with the arts community. The Esplanade is celebrating its 10th anniversary, so this is a good moment to reflect on its future. And I read this morning, with admiration, a very thoughtful essay by Clarissa Woon. Yeah? I want to share with you my own take on the Esplanade's future. I hope that, I don't know whether there's anybody here from the Esplanade. Is anybody here from the Esplanade? No, but I'm sure, Rosa, you can tell her my message. In the coming years, I hope the Esplanade will play a stronger role as a strategic investor, as an entrepreneur, and as an impresario, and not just as the landlord of 2 world-class facilities. Let me explain what I mean. I would like to see more world premieres of Asian epics like Ila Galigo. I will never forget the sweet torture I suffered watching the Chinese opera, the Peony Pavilion. I don't remember, 9 or 12 hours over many days. I hope that the Esplanade will again mount something iconic, like that. But just a digression, I must tell you that I was very sad when I attended the Peony Pavilion. When the same opera was performed in New York at the Lincoln Center, and in Paris, it was attended by full houses. And you would imagine that in a country like Singapore, where the Chinese opera tradition, Chinese speaking, it will be full houses too, but it wasn't. I was really disappointed that it was playing to only half full houses. So, if you want to compare the cultural literacy of these 3 great cities, we are very far behind Paris and New York. That you have people in France and New York who don't speak the language, and yet they were so enthused to see a performance of this great Chinese opera. I would also like to see an ASEAN or Asian choral competition at the Esplanade. In addition, I would like to be inspired by some path-breaking orchestras of the world, by which I mean, for example, the orchestra from Palestine, under the baton of Maestro Daniel Barenboim, or the orchestra from the barrios from Venezuela, and other path-breaking orchestras. I'd like to see Esplanade take some risk, be a strategic investor, and do something that commercial impresarios, the performing center at Star Resorts World Sentosa and Marina Bay Sands will not do. Let me now turn to something different. I want to speak to a period of my life when I was in Washington, D.C., and Heng Chi was also there, but for a much longer period. I had spent more than 20 years of my life in the United States of America. A year in Boston, 13 in New York, 6 in Washington, and shorter periods in Buffalo, New York, and Palo Alto, California. As a museum-loving person, I had visited all the great museums of these cities and other American museums. I'm very impressed by them. And when I was in Washington, D.C., I met a remarkable French ambassador, Ambassador de Margerie, whose previous appointment before Washington was a director of the museums of France. You know? And we all call him Bobby. I said, Bobby, I hope one day I will be blessed and be given a job to look after the museums of Singapore. And I promised myself that if ever this crazy wish were to come true, I would like to do for our museums what I observe in America. Museums that are attractive, well-loved, and well-visited. And I said to myself that maybe in Singapore, we could one day look forward to blockbuster exhibitions, which is a very common sight in New York and Washington. Well, you know, you never know what you wish for and what will come true. In 2002, the government asked me whether I would be willing to succeed Lim Chee On as chairman at NHB. I leapt at it because I said, wow, this is a dream come true, you know. But I was very distressed to find that in my first year, 2002, our museums had a total visitorship of only 500,000. I was determined to change the paradigm, and I told my CEO, Lim Sok Peng, that I want 1 million visitors in 3 years, 2 million in 6 years, and 3 million in 9 years. Sok Peng thought I was crazy. She said, this is just absurd, not achievable. So I said, well, if we don't try, you never know, right? So we tried very hard, and we exceeded our target of 1 million in less than 3 years. And when Michael succeeded Sok Peng, I told Michael that your KPI is produce 2 million visitors in 6 years and 3 million in 9 years. We all of you who were with me in NHB in the sub-boards, we did remarkable things, and we transformed the museum scene in Singapore. And I will always be grateful to Michael that he really brought about a paradigm change. And in my final year as chairman, 2011, we had 2.7 million visitors, little short of 3 million. And I hope that you will set even more ambitious targets for Rosa Daniel. And talking about blockbuster exhibitions, I recall with pleasure, and Kenson will remember this very well, that Kenson and I were so happy when we saw queues of Singaporeans queuing up around the block, waiting to see this beautiful exhibition at ACM from the Vatican Museums. And the demand was so overwhelming that Kenson decided on the last day to keep the museum open for 24 hours. And I remember that you came down by taxi at midnight to chat with the people in the queue. So these were very happy experiences. I think today we can say that our museums are capable of mounting world-class exhibitions in terms of content, curatorship, design, and presentation. Our museums have gained international recognition and have been embraced by our people, by our residents, and by visitors. The credit for this happy state of affairs is really due to the inspiring chairman of the various museums and to the senior management. And I'll just mention a few of them. Michael Koh, Kenson Kwok, Ken Chow, Chaw Lin, Heng Noi, who's here, Lo Heng Noi, Pit Kwan Hua, Trace Prihadi, Hui Sim Tan, Heidi Tan, Su Hui Hua, and many others. I want to say a very big thank you to all of them. I would also like to mention the indispensable contribution made to the NHB family by the friends of the museum and by the many volunteers. I've often said to the civil society in Singapore that for me, one of the best and most valued non-governmental organizations in Singapore is FOM. Yeah. I know there are some friends on FOM here. The last major assignment I was given was to chair the international jury tasked with selecting an architect or an architectural practice to undertake the historic endeavor of turning two of our national monuments, the City Hall Supreme Court, into the new National Art Gallery. This was really a very interesting assignment. And I learned a great deal from the other members of the jury who were either distinguished architects or renowned museum directors from Guimet in France, from the Smithsonian in Washington, and from Tate Modern in England. Yeah. After deciding on the winner, we had to brief the cabinet to persuade the cabinet to endorse our selection and to back the project. And I will never forget this meeting with the cabinet, which was held at a city hall. But unfortunately, confidentiality prevents me from telling you the juicy details. I look forward very much to 2015 when the National Art Gallery will be open. I'm quite confident that Naga will become a world-class museum, and anyone, anywhere in the world who wishes to see the best of Southeast Asian art will have to come to Naga. I'm also quite confident, having been part of the team that built the Esplanade, that Naga will be embraced by the people of Singapore in the same way as the Esplanade has. And so, looking forward to 2015, I think these two iconic projects, Esplanade and Naga, will become the twin peaks of our cultural landscape. Let me now turn to the serious part of my brief remarks. What's my vision? My vision is that in the years to come, we will develop the art, culture, and heritage sector and raise it to as high a level as possible, and to be commensurate with our achievements in the economy and in infrastructure. We have world-class infrastructure and a world-class economy. I think we deserve to have a world-class heritage sector. To achieve this vision, we must nurture a new generation of Singaporeans who will be highly educated, professionally competent, globally minded, and culture-loving. We want to motivate Singaporeans to love books and to develop a lifelong habit of reading. We want to encourage Singaporeans to appreciate art, music, theatre, dance, film, etc., not just as consumers, but also as producers. We want to harness the energy of Singaporeans who wish to remember our past, while at the same time embracing our future. I regard the enthusiasm shown by Singaporeans recently to conserve the Tanjong Pagar railway station and the Bukit Brown Cemetery as positive developments. Yeah. My vision for the future is a culturally vibrant Singapore. My vision for the future is a Singapore which will be the cultural hub of ASEAN. My vision for Singapore is that it will be the cultural crossroads between the great civilizations of East and West. And I say that no city and no country in Asia is better placed than Singapore to play this role. I want to say to my good friend Yu Huat that he's a very lucky man. My plea to the government for free admission to our museum was granted during his tenure. So was my unsuccessful plea to the government to match the private donations to arts and heritage organizations. I'm very happy that Minister Lawrence Wong recently announced the government has agreed to set up a 200 million culture matching fund. These are two important breakthroughs. So let me just share with you 3 thoughts about the future. My first thought is to focus on developing our soft infrastructure. In recent decades, the government has prioritized the development of our hard infrastructure. The Esplanade, the extension to this museum, Naga, the renewal of Victoria Theatre and Concert Hall are some big ticket items. And we must not be ungrateful to the government for these major investments. But I think the time has come for us to focus on developing our soft infrastructure. And what do I mean by this? I mean developing our human resource, developing our intellectual and cultural capital. My vision of the Singapore I want cannot be fulfilled if Singaporeans are uncultured and not culture-loving. And I must tell you that my secretary told me not to say what I've written in the next 2 sentences. My secretary tried to protect me from my recklessness, but I want to say it. I want to say it because I think it's important to say. The uncouth behavior of some of our students at concerts is an indication of one of our problems. Yeah. And the low level of musical knowledge of Singaporeans often lead them to applaud the orchestra when it is inappropriate to do so. You know, a simple litmus test for me of the cultural achievements of a city is whether the audience applaud at inappropriate moments. It never happens in New York. It often happens in Washington, D.C. Because many of the congressmen, senators, lobbyists, lawyers, they are not culture-loving people. And especially when it's a charity concert and they're given free tickets, you know. So they were embarrassed. They were embarrassed their friend by applauding at the wrong time. The same in Singapore. So I look forward to a day when our students would conduct themselves impeccably at concerts. I look forward to the day when Singaporeans will achieve the same level of cultural literacy as New Yorkers and never applaud at inappropriate moments. To achieve this, we need the help of the Ministry of Education, because I think we really need MOE's help to raise the cultural literacy of our students. And I would say to Heng Chi that perhaps NAC should also review your very successful arts and education program to see how you can take it to another level. The School of the Arts, SOTA, and the Yong Siu To Conservatory at NUS are doing very well and appear to be adequately funded. The same cannot be said about our 2 arts colleges, the Nanyang Academy of Fine Arts, or NAFA, and LaSalle College of the Arts. They are both underfunded. And there are too many needy students at the 2 colleges, and there are not enough financial resources to help these needy students. I know this as a fact because I'm helping the both the colleges to raise money for bursaries for these needy students. But the demand exceeds the supply, you know. I want to appeal to MCCY to consider doing a major review of the two arts colleges with a view to giving them stronger support. After all, we do need well-educated and well-trained people to power our culture and heritage industry and to grow the sector. In addition to developing our human resource, we should also focus on developing our intellectual and cultural capital. We should give a higher recognition to and better support for our authors, our composers, our choreographers, our filmmakers, our curators, etc. And by better recognition, I don't mean just in monetary terms, although in Singapore the most common expression of love is money, but I also mean raising the psychic income, you know. We don't do enough to show appreciation to these creators of content in Singapore. I'm currently reading two excellent novels by Suchan Christine Lim, The River Song, and Claire Tham, The Inlet. And I hope before too long, one of our novelists will win the Booker Prize. Yeah. I think we should celebrate a new generation of filmmakers who are making an impression on the world, you know. Anthony Chen, Royston Tan, and others. And we should really nurture these content creators and celebrate them. My takeaway from the successful museums in America is that they had great collections, beautiful premises, and very talented people. All three factors are important. But if I have to choose only one of the three, you will be surprised by my choice. I would choose the people. Yeah. I've come to the conclusion that at the end of the day, the success or failure of any enterprise, including a cultural enterprise, depends on the people. Yeah. We must therefore nurture young Singaporeans, recruit them, reward them, and retain them. Here I would like to make an appeal to you and Rosa that NHB is a dream job, you know. I mean, you cannot be happier than working in a museum and cultural environment, and yet the staff engagement at NHB is terrible, you know. So it's terrible, and we are not rewarding them properly. Every year I quarrel with Michael Koh, the people I thought deserve a grade 8, given a C grade, and I was told that, well, it can't be helped because the ministry imposed certain quotas and restrictions on us. I think that's wrong, you know. People should be evaluated in an objective way, should be compensated in commensurate fashion, and we should develop a work culture at all of our museums, in NHB as a whole, that are affirming of our young people. And so NHB could be a dream job for young Singaporeans. My second thought is that we should focus on Southeast Asia. The National University in its previous incarnation had a museum, art museum, and the first director of the museum was a great art historian, Michael Sullivan, who passed away recently. In one of his writings before he passed away, Michael Sullivan reflected on Singapore's positioning. And I want to quote him. Michael Sullivan said, Singapore's karma is to be the hub around which are the great civilizations of Indonesia, Thailand, Cambodia, and others. I agree with Michael. I would say that Singapore's destiny is to draw inspiration from this ring of civilizations around us, as well as from the ancestral civilizations of China, India, and Islam, to forge our own cultural identity. Singapore's strength must be in Southeast Asia. This is why I am very pleased that NAGA will focus on Southeast Asian art. And this is also the reason which led my colleagues and I in NHB to have convened the biennial conference of ASEAN Museum Directors, and to hold each year across all the museums a celebration of the culture and heritage of a different ASEAN country. And I want to say to Boon Hui that he and his colleagues have done a very good job with this year's Biennale. Yeah? And to take nothing away from your merit, Boon Hui, I want to say one of the reasons why this year's Biennale is much more successful than previous Biennale is that it focused on Southeast Asia. Singaporeans feel more connected to the artists of our region than to artists from other parts of the world. Culturally, we have actually become a community, you know, and our artists, our people feel that they understand the worldview, the anguish, the aspiration, the hopes and dreams of our neighbors. And I think we should always remember this, that our destiny is that we are forever part of Southeast Asia, and we can be the cultural harbinger of the region. My third thought, and Boon Hui told me that he was worried for my safety here. my third thought, actually a very simple thought, you know, which is to say that there's an ongoing debate in Singapore between those who want our cultural policy to focus on high art and those who want to focus on community or people's art. I think there's also a similar debate going on in Singapore about the future direction of our renamed Festival of the Arts, which is now called the Singapore International Art Festival. And the debate is what should be the future direction of SIAF. Should it focus on the mainstream, or should it focus on the avant-garde and the cutting edge? And my answer is not a cop-out. I really, and not because of Boon Hui's warning, I really believe the answer to both questions is not either or, but both. Yeah. We want to bring culture and the arts to our people. And there's nothing wrong with, therefore, bringing it to the community centers and regional libraries. And this is consistent with my vision. I want all Singaporeans, and not just the elite, to appreciate art and to be culture loving. But at the same time, there must be no diminution of our long-term commitment to high culture. And I want to do both. In the same way, I think that the Singapore International Art Festival cannot have a single focus. And I don't think my two good friends, King Sen and Cholin, are here. But if they were here, I would say the same thing to them. The SIAF cannot have a single focus. It must cater to its different stakeholders and constituencies who want diversity and balance. What does this mean? It means that we need a balance between big-name orchestras and contemporary music, between classical ballet and modern dance, between experimental theatre, and I was going to say Shakespeare, then I thought maybe a Singapore equivalent of Shakespeare, Guo Bao Kun. Bao Kun might rebel against my mentioning him in place of Shakespeare, because in his time he was a rebel, you know. But with the passage of time, Bao Kun's legacy has become part of our iconography, you know? So my take on the future direction of SIAF is that it cannot have a single focus, and I hope King Sen and Cholin will listen. In order for SIAF to succeed, it must cater to different constituency within our family. And there will be people who want big name orchestras and will be very angry if there are none, and others who look forward to contemporary music. And I think that it is possible for us to do that. I want to conclude and look forward to taking your questions. I want to conclude by saying that 24 years after the Ong Teng Cheong report, I can safely say that many of the aspirations in that report have been fulfilled. I think we have ascended to a higher peak, but there's still a lot to be done. There is agreement in Singapore that we should support art, culture, and heritage. We should do so because it brings meaning and beauty into our lives. We should do so because they bond us as a people and remind us of where we came from. We should do so because art, culture, and heritage will make us a more self-confident, thoughtful, and gracious people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Koh. May I invite you to take your seat for the question and answer session, please? May I also invite Mr. Ong Yu Huat back to moderate the session, please? Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now ready to commence this afternoon's question and answer session. Please feel free to direct your questions to Professor Koh. My colleagues will be walking around with microphones, so please raise your hand if you wish to ask a question. Thank you.
Hi, I've got the mic, so I think I'm going to ask the first question. My name is Jack Lee. I'm sorry, I'm here. My name is Jack Lee, and I teach law at SMU, just next door. I have a comment which you'd like to perhaps respond to, and a question. The comment is, I was a little bit disturbed by something that you mentioned in the beginning of your talk, which was the differential treatment of the satanic verses and the last temptation of Christ. And it seemed to me that perhaps the decision not to allow the first book to be published in Singapore, brought into Singapore, reflected a distrust of one particular community, which was perhaps misplaced. I don't know. Why assume that one community will react in a good way and one will not? So no, I don't know.
I wouldn't say it's good or bad. I mean, after Satanic Verses is published, you may or may not remember the consequence in many Muslim majority countries. There were riots, arson, innocent people were killed, And even in a Muslim minority country like India, there were violent consequences. I mean, so you just...
Was it not underestimating
So I'm a lawyer, but I'm also a pragmatist,
I don't know. I just think, was it not underestimating the community in Singapore that would take a different approach to the matter?
All our Muslim brothers and sisters appealed passionately to us to ban the book. Yeah, I mean, there was just not a single dissident in the Malay Muslim community who spoke up for the book. Not one. And I tell you, I committed an even greater sin, than Satanic Verses. We were given, maybe I shouldn't tell you all my secrets. We were given a really beautiful book from the Metropolitan Museum of Art on Islamic art. And some of our Muslim and Malay brothers and sisters had seen the book, and they said this book should be banned. And the rest of us in the committee who were not Muslim took the book home, read it, and we came back and said, this is a very scholarly book. There's nothing that's critical of Islam, So why should this book be banned? And they said it should be banned because it contained a reproduction of an Iranian painting showing the ascendance of the Prophet Muhammad to heaven. And to the Sunnis, this was just totally unacceptable. I mean, this is haram, you know. So I think within this Muslim family, there are differences of views. Some are much more conservative than others. I mean, the Sufis, for example, are the most liberal. I think Sunnis probably most conservative, huh? Because the Iranians do have paintings showing the Prophet, you know. But to the Sunnis, any depiction is unacceptable. So we also banned this beautiful book on Islamic art from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Is it against my own personal belief? I would say yes. It's against my belief. But when I'm given responsibility, I have to, in a way, put aside my own beliefs and do what I think is in the public interest. So I apologize to you for not being a man of principle as you would like me to be.
Oh dear. Here's the question. The question is, how do we strike that balance between culture and heritage and development? Should the government reconsider its decision to eventually clear Bukit Brown Cemetery entirely?
Sorry, say that again.
How do we strike that balance?
About Bukit Brown,
yes. So how do we strike that balance between culture and heritage and development? And should the government reconsider what I think is going to be the eventual complete clearance of Bukit Brown Cemetery in a decade or so?
There are many examples in Singapore. The tension between our wish to conserve our past and our wish to make room for the future, you know, and Bukit Brown is an example. We also have similar tension between nature and development, because I'm the patron of the Nature Society, and one issue on the top of our agenda right now is the Cross Island line, you know, whether or not it should cut into the nature reserve or whether it should do a slight detour, you know. So these are real issues that of contemporary Singapore, and we have to think through this. I mean, I rather talk about this Cross Island line because I think it will probably have a happier outcome than Bukit Brown. The Land Transport Authority is going to commission an environmental impact assessment. And I must applaud them because they have invited the Nature Society to make a scientific presentation to them of what would be lost if the line were to cut across the nature reserve, and also to help them prepare the brief for the foreign expert, you know. And rather than be hostile and aloof, you know, my colleagues and I said, no, we will work with LTA. We want, if possible, a consensual outcome, you know. So there are some cases where this is possible if it's early enough. Unfortunately, in Bukit Brown, it was all a done deal before the so-called public hearings and so on. Can we have somebody else?
Anyone else? Yeah, with a question? Over here.
Hello. I am Zhou Min, and I'm new to Singapore. I'm a professor of sociology at NTU.
You're the new director of the Chinese Heritage Center, right?
Yes.
Warm welcome to Singapore.
Thank you. I'm Professor Koh, and I really enjoy your lecture, and it's very informative for me. A question that I have is, I would like to hear your thoughts on whether there is a difference between culture and heritage, or the two are the same thing. Because sometimes when we are talking about culture, and we are talking about high culture and the elite classical music and that, and then when we are talking about heritage, and we more refer to the indigenous culture, the local people, the local culture, and whatnot. So I would like to hear more about how you think about the culture and heritage and how these two are together, or in what way they are distinct.
This question is too profound for me. Yeah, too deep for me. Maybe our Professor Channing Ji can answer the question. Sure. She's much more learned than I am.
We'll get Professor Koh to answer the next question. Anyone? Willie?
Willie.
Yeah.
I want to follow through this this comment on the Bukit Brown Cemetery. You mentioned the road is a done thing. Why is it a done thing? Shouldn't it be reopened? Can it be delayed for a while and have more information? What else can be done there? Because, as you know, the Bukit Brown site has now been adopted by the World Heritage Council.
Yeah, I know.
So I think there are lots more information is coming in.
Right, okay.
Please remember, this is only a one agency decision of having the road across. As Kishore said in his statement, that maybe we should really regret that they pulled down the National Library by the same agency. Shouldn't the agency be asked to hold on and wait for a while?
I've always admired Willie because he's always been passionate about his commitments, his ideals, and his passions, and willing to campaign for them. I think you should continue to campaign, but so unfortunately, I also wear a government hat, and the government pays my gaji, and I've been told in no uncertain terms that the decision makers have decided not to further review the situation, and it would be pointless for me to try to reopen the case. I think my personal sympathies are one thing, but I feel that if the case is closed and I can't do anything to improve the situation, rather than spend my energy on that, I'd rather spend my energy in preventing something bad from happening to the nature reserves, where I can still help to bring the government and the civil society together.
Thank you, Prof Koh. Yes, Kathy, new CEO of NAC. Thank you for a very inspiring lecture. My question is on advocacy and patronage. You're such a great advocate for the arts, and I wish there were more voices, influential voices out there. And I wish there were also more corporates sitting in this room listening to that. I also lived several years in Washington together with Prof Chan, and there's a great culture of giving in the US. In Asia, as I understand it, in the last 2 weeks of briefing, it's a very nascent but growing idea that there should be more patronage into the arts sector. But unfortunately, the corporate sector in Asia tend to be more giving towards the social sector. And so my question is, how can I grow this culture of giving to the arts? And how can I grow the community of great advocates for the arts?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Actually, you come home at a good time. No, really, I mean, Singapore has changed, In the past, nobody would give money to culture and the arts. I remember when I went to see the venerable former chairman and CEO OCBC, Tan Chin Tuan, and asked him whether he would support culture and the art. He scolded me and said, "Don't waste your time on these frivolous things," So to him, this is frivolous, because he had no appreciation of, no interest in. But that's different. The current generation of corporate leaders are different. They will give money to education, to welfare, but also to culture. And this has been my experience both at NAC and NHB. You know, we raise considerable amounts of money, as well as contribution in kind. And I would say corporate philanthropy is growing. If you look at the numbers from IRAS, last year, the Singapore public gave over $1 billion to charity, you know. Now, we're still not getting a major slice of that, but I think you will agree that corporate philanthropy and individual philanthropy for this sector is growing, and we can do more. I chair a foundation for Credit Suisse because Credit Suisse has a corporate philosophy of encouraging high net worth individuals to support philanthropy. And through these people, I try to talk to their very rich clients, you know, and to say, give something back, you know, either to your country, to the region, or to the world, you know, and support a cause close to your heart. It can be education, it can be helping vulnerable women or children, it could be culture, you know, and we try to help them find an appropriate object for their philanthropy. I think we should all do what we can. You know, I think NAC has by now a well-established patron of NAC award, and I don't know how much money Heng Chi you raised, but it's a considerable amount of money. We can do much more, and we will never be where America is. Never be, because the history of our two countries are different. The relationship between the people and the government in America is fundamentally different from that here or in China or anywhere else. In Singapore, as in Europe, the government has to play a bigger role in supporting culture than the private sector. In America, the government's contribution is minimal. I think if you look at Lincoln Center, the city, the state, and the federal government contribute 2% to its revenue. But you have a well-entrenched culture in America by wealthy Americans to support a cause close to their heart. And I was living in New York City when the Metropolitan Opera was celebrating its 100th anniversary. And the leaders of Metropolitan Opera set as a target that they want to raise $100 million on its 100th birthday. And in a few days, they exceeded the target, you know. I mean, the outpouring of generosity by wealthy Americans for museums, symphony, ballet, it's just unbelievable. It's one of the high points of American culture. And it will take us a very long time to replicate that. But the trend is good. You've come home at a good time. Singapore has changed. There's a new generation of younger leaders at the helm of our corporations, and many of them are culture-loving people.
Prof, I might just add that Professor Koh is right. You've probably come back at the right time. In all the fundraising initiatives over a period of time, what we're seeing is a more generous public, especially the corporate sector giving, but it has been somewhat ad hoc. Only when requests are made or there's some special event that the branding can be associated with. But what we are trying to work on, which is starting to make some headway, is where companies start to program in the support of arts and culture into their overall CSR budget, as opposed to before. And I'm hoping that very shortly, I think NHB will be able to share a rather large donation that we informally heard was going to be made today, actually, earlier this morning.
Oh, okay, wonderful. Yeah, and you heard is a living example of a corporate chief who, made support for the art part of the CSR of his company.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have time for one last question. Oh, okay. See, we have 2 questions. Okay, we have time for 2 last questions.
Hi, Prof Koh. My subconscious made me raise my hand. My question is, you mentioned that Singapore is very well placed to take the lead in promoting the culture of Southeast Asia as well as of Singapore. Not forgetting, of course, our ancestral cultures of China, India, and Islam. I wonder, though, I say this because of my own educational experience. When I was going through my undergraduate days at the National University doing history, we had small modules on modern European history or early modern European history, history of the Cold War, America, and so on. Over the years, I see that courses appear to be tailored more and more towards the strategic interests of Singapore internationally and regionally. While I applaud, and I agree with you for the very good reasons that we should be digging more and trying to understand more about the culture of our neighbors, especially contemporarily, are our younger generation not in danger of kind of forgetting that this region was always international? It historically was made vibrant because of maritime history with Europe, China, India. It continues to do very vibrant international trade, and there are all sorts of global issues. So are we not, and if we ask MOE for help, are we worried that actually things might become a bit parochial?
Become a bit what?
Parochial.
Parochial.
Inward-looking.
Didn't quite understand your question. Why would it become parochial?
Are we driving a kind of official or regional narrative about Singapore and Southeast Asia, and in looking at this region, concentrating at this region, are we sort of missing the overview of global history, global cultural interactions?
I'm not suggesting that we should be exclusively interested only in Southeast Asia. No, I'm not saying that. We should be globally minded, as I said. I mean, Singapore's success and prosperity depends on our remaining open to the world, to be linked to all parts of the world, So I'm not saying that focus exclusively on Southeast Asia, but Southeast Asia is our home. And our strength, our cultural strength, is that we are able to showcase not just Singapore's cultural achievements, which are very modest because of our small size and short history, but we can showcase the cultural achievements of our region, which are considerable, In a way, we are making virtue out of necessity. When I was chairman of NHB, one of my ambitions, which I managed to fulfill, was to persuade my colleagues in all the museums to go with me to visit each of the other 9 ASEAN countries. Yeah. In the beginning, there was some resistance because people always look west. They don't look to our neighborhood, and they wonder whether there's anything to see. Can we learn anything from our neighbors? And I remember we began our journey in Indonesia. Yeah. And I will never forget this, Instead of going to Jakarta first, we went to Bali first. Bali, Jogja, then Jakarta. When we were in Bali, one of the curators from this museum, a young Malay woman, came up to me and said, "Prof, I've never been here before, and I never imagined there's such a place as this in Indonesia, I say, well, Indonesia is not Jakarta writ large, It's a huge archipelago, and it's a very rich country. So when we went to Jogja, and I took them to see Borobudur and Prambanan, and to, to visit the great Gajah Mada University and so on. and to go to Jakarta, look at the textile museum, the puppet museum, and so on. It was an eye-opener for my colleagues on our museum, because they had always looked west. They had not visited our neighbors. We unfortunately have an arrogant attitude towards our neighbors. We tend to look down on our neighbors, when our neighbors actually are culturally more endowed than we are, you know. And there was great resistance, almost a revolt, when I suggested visiting Laos and Brunei. They said, why go to Laos and Brunei? There's nothing to see. And I said, well, have you ever been? And I said, no. So why don't we have an open mind, you know, go to Laos? And when we went to Luang Prabang, I mean, everybody agreed that this was a jewel. This was a jewel. And not only that, we learned the history of Laos, its relations with its neighbors. We learned the culture of the country, and we learned also that Little Singapore, through one of our theatre company, Theatre Work, had played a very important, and is playing a very important role in reviving the Ramayana tradition in Luang Prabang, you know. And to welcome us, Theatre Work put on 2 episodes of Ramayana, and it was December, so the weather was perfect. The performance was on in front of the temple, you know, and it was just a very inspiring visit. And so at the end of that visit, all my colleagues and I felt that this was really a worthwhile visit. And even in Brunei, you know, when we went to Brunei, we learned that the Brunei Sultanate, for example, one of the most ancient sultanates in Southeast Asia, and that at its peak, it was a very substantial maritime empire and had jurisdiction over southern Philippines, Malacca, and so on, you know. That it has an unbroken history of the Sultanate that goes back many hundred years. We learned that the second Sultan of Brunei was a prince from China, because the first Sultan didn't have a son, and asked the Emperor of China to supply a groom for his daughter. And all this we found. We visited the Islamic Museum and saw some very beautiful works. So we learn a great deal from visiting our neighbors. We need to be more humble towards our neighbors. We wish to earn their friendship, and for them to feel that Singapore is their friend, and we are proud of them, and we wish to showcase their history, their culture, and their heritage. You know, we are, because we're so small, we have no alternative but to collect both our own and our neighbors. You see, our neighbors are much more endowed. You know, so if you go to Thailand, they don't collect the art of any other countries except Thailand, because there's so much to collect. You know, the Vietnamese don't collect any country outside of Vietnam. Because we are small, we have no choice but to collect the whole region. And we have been blessed because of necessity. We end up by having the world's best collection of the visual art of the region, you know. But I'm not saying that we focus only on Southeast Asia. And I would say that, you know, I'm really impressed that if you look at Singaporean, there's a wish by Singaporean to know other Asian countries better. Look at the fascination by younger Singaporean with contemporary Korean culture. I mean, okay, you don't need to love K-pop, but you know, or look at the tourist flows from Singapore to Japan. Japan is a very expensive country, but the number of Singaporeans who vacation in Japan is very impressive. You know, look at how we have embraced Japanese cuisine. I lost count now. I asked the Japanese ambassador how many Japanese restaurants in Singapore. I think the last time I asked him, he said something like 300. You know, so you know we're embracing Asia. You know, and I think I was too early. In 1993, I started a festival of Asian performing arts because I wanted to interest Singaporean in the cultural traditions of our neighbor. You know. But Giorgio didn't share my vision, and he said, no, not a good idea. Let's merge this into FOA and make it annual. But I think and I hope that Ken Sen and Charlene will also remember this, that the Singapore International Arts Festival shouldn't just focus on the West. We should also bring to Singapore the inspiring performing arts of the Asian countries. So, long answer to your short question. I think Rosa should have the last say.
Do we have any more questions?
Yeah, if there are other questions, I'm happy. Alfred Wong. Alfred, maybe let Alfred go first. And I want to take this occasion to salute Alfred.
Tommy, I can't let you go without reminding you of the 1963 Southeast Asian Festival, in which we have the first Southeast Asian Festival in Singapore, before Singapore was a nation. Remember?
I remember.
Singapore was a nation in 1965. The International the Southeast Asian Festival was 1963. So there you go. That is your Southeast Asian Festival. Yeah. Thank you.
And this was Rajaratnam's vision, actually. I mean, Rajaratnam was a man ahead of his time. And Dr. Goh, too, Dr. Goh was the patron of the National Theatre, and Alfred Wong is the dean of our architectural profession, and is the designer of some of our iconic buildings, many of which we have unkindly done away with. But the National Theatre is one, and I'm so pleased that Professor Lai Chi Ken has recreated a little miniature of the front of the theatre. Rosa?
Oh, you want to go first? Go ahead.
Prof Chan first.
I'd like to take this moment to actually pay a public tribute to Tommy Koh, for everything he has done for the arts, for actually the intellectual life of Singapore. Tommy, you've been an icon, you've been an inspiration for a lot of young people in Singapore, for your contributions to law study as Dean of Law, for diplomacy, for your very distinguished ambassadorships at the UN and in the United States, and on your return to Singapore in fostering IPS and also really in being a czar of the arts. I think you and Giorgio at the right time really built up the arts scene for Singapore. What I wanted to say, adding on to what you said, is that I've been away for 16 years in the United States as ambassador of Singapore to the United States. And coming home, the first thing I've seen is a vast change in Singapore. Singaporeans who've been living in Singapore maybe do not quite appreciate, because the change came on you gradually. But I've seen this very amazing change. And since wearing the hat of the Arts Council chairman, I've just been thrown into the arts groups. And James, who sat next to me today, told me something I did not know. He said, in every school in Singapore, in so many schools, you see umpteen orchestras, a Chinese orchestra, Western orchestra, percussion bands, and so on. And I've been going to some of these shows. The standard is really quite remarkable what we have moved. And I find in the music scene especially, we've really just gone quantum leaps. So the people you're looking for to help grow the art scene is there, and we should be positive and encouraging. With Kathy, I shared this concern about how to grow advocacy and patronage for the arts. And I look at what the United States does and what we can do. But I don't want always to be like the United States, but because I understand Singapore is so different. As Yuat said, CSR is becoming big now. And corporates are giving money. They don't give like 100 million to Esplanade, but it's so easy for universities to raise 90 for 90 for Lee Kuan Yew, on Lee Kuan Yew's birthday, for bursaries, for scholarships, for universities. So we're getting there. I think for the arts, what we have to do is to work at it very persistently and consistently. I like and I hope we get support here, the way Kennedy Center raises money. You know, I could walk up to somebody and say, would you contribute $500 for the next 3 years to this? Will you contribute $1,000 next 3 years? Will you contribute $10,000 for the next 3 years? You recruit. And I'm wondering whether government will allow crowdsourcing for money for the arts. If we can, the arts groups can really grow money. You know, but we're really in a good spot. And I think you've laid the way for all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, Prof Koh actually, Heng Chi made it easy for me. I just want to echo the tributes that she's paid. And especially, I want to say that I think this is rich payback for a lunch. I think we better make a date for a gourmet dinner. Thank you very much for all your thoughts. First, allow me maybe some reflections or comments on the many, thought-provoking things that you said, and then my question, which I think will allow you to nicely close the session. On Bukit Brown, I just wanted to say, please don't lose heart and lose hope in us. I think we could have done a lot more with phase 1. To put things in perspective, it's 3,000 graves out of 100,000 graves, and we are deadly serious about wanting to document and research and enter the discussion as to what can be done to balance all the different competing needs. I don't think in NHB or MCCY we can claim to say we have the final decision. Obviously not. It will have to be trade-offs across different considerations. We worked very closely on the environment and on issues like the green issues, biodiversity, clean air, climate change. I think we've gone some way to strike that balance. And it's a constant process of a negotiation and discussion, and it's an iterative process. So I haven't completely lost heart, and I hope that you won't as well. And I think it's an exciting times because we've got to fight for the next lot. It's actually a very small plot, the current phase 1, and really we're talking about the vast tract of Bukit Brown that is still up for discussion and negotiation with various agencies who all have their legitimate considerations. That's on Bukit Brown. The other points really to give you some heart as well, that we're doing as much as we can. On the Esplanade, you'll be very happy to know that MCCY so totally believes that we have unfinished business there. And there's something beautiful about riverfront, our Marina Bay front, and we should continue to work at it. And I think this next phase is quite exciting for us as we argue for the next big investment along for our arts infrastructure, and definitely Esplanade 2 is unfinished business. On the museum visitorship, I was just sharing with Chairman that actually we almost hit 3 million, so we'll work at it. So the target you set for us is not that far away. Yeah. On the issues of capability development, I think NHB and NAC have to take a role there. That's very much a government function because it is long-term, it's not short range. It requires for investments and in a sustainable fashion. I think continuity in policies and the ability to join the dots across ministries and across government. So on capability development and sustainable strategies, that's something that we have to work really hard on. So on that note, I just wanted to ask a question that maybe allows you to sort of, in that sense, tie up the session. And my question is, if you were in the ministry now, and you were the minister, and you had to do 3 big things in the next 3 years, what would be your famous 3 points for us? Thank you.
No, I think my first big point is to help the 2 arts colleges and to look at how we can further develop our human resource and to encourage the further growth of content. We really need to think of some way to motivate people to create and to reward those who do, whether they be authors, composers, choreographers, curators, and so on, I mean, we should showcase and profile them. So Singaporeans tend to be sometimes not very generous towards our countrymen, countrywomen. You know, unlike other countries who are very proud of their fellow countrymen, countrywomen, and promote their careers, you know, I think in Singapore we tend not to do that. I'd like to see us being much more generous and being more willing to promote the careers and prospects. I mean, if you take our musicians, in the past we had some very talented performers, but I couldn't do for them their careers what other countries were willing to do, you know. So I want to see that change. The second big thing, I think, is to get everybody to agree that on the positioning of Singapore culturally, that Singapore must remain open to the world. We want to be secure at home, but at the same time, we want to be anchored to the region, to our major interlocutors, and we want to be open to the influences of all these partners. But I want to say once more that our destiny is here. Our destiny is here, and I think we should prioritize what we do in Southeast Asia, our collections, our performances, you know, to reinforce our engagement with our neighbors and to secure a place in the region. So I would say, secondly, I want to persuade all the stakeholders in Singapore that just as Naga is going to showcase Southeast Asian visual art, that SIAF, Biennale, and so on should have a certain regional focus. I guess my third point is to grow ownership of what we do, you know, not just corporations, but just to encourage all Singaporeans to feel that what we do in the art, culture and heritage sector is meaningful to their lives, and to feel that what we are doing affects their future and their children's future. So I want to see a greater ownership of what we do in this sector, and this will be reflected partly in the form of volunteer, partly in the form of support money, but also donation and so on. You know, so I want, in this sense, to move closer to the American ideal, because like Heng Chi, I was very inspired by what I saw in America, how the community embraces the ballet, the symphony, the museum, you know, the library, and how these cultural institutions are so embedded and so loved by the people. And I want to replicate that in Singapore, I would say. Thank you.
Well, I think we've come to the end of the session. Yeah. Listening to Tommy Koh is always such a treat. The point about the big change that Heng Chi mentioned, actually, even though I was not away, I could notice a huge change, a huge upsurge in interest in the arts, in culture, in heritage, for all kinds of reasons. But it bodes well for the whole sector. I would say that the takeaway I would have from Professor Koh's talk would be, you know, that this is a person who keeps pushing. He keeps always saying, why not? Go and try. And he has these very high ideals. Certainly, when I succeeded Tommy at the NHB, he left behind a list of to-dos and said, make sure it happens. So I was very pleased that I didn't have to try so hard. And Minister Lawrence Wong said, okay, free admission. So that was one of the to-dos. So, of course, the amount of time we have for this afternoon doesn't do justice to the experience and all the stories that you could tell. I would probably end the session, and perhaps we can indicate through our applause whether you should be encouraged to write a book.
Ladies and gentlemen, we would now like to invite Mr. Ong to present a token of appreciation to Professor Koh. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for your participation in today's session. This marks the end of today's lecture. We would invite you to remain seated, please, while Mr. Ong and Professor Koh take their leave. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to invite you now to a tea reception in the foyer.
Specialized